Hey everyone, before we get into today's episode, just want to let you know that this conversation with Garrison Hayes is a two-part conversation. This is the first part that you will be listening and watching today. So we hope you love it. We hope that you enjoy it. And next week you will see the second part to our conversation. Enjoy it. Welcome to another episode of Trending Up with Edgar de Leon and Sebastian Lopez. We hope you enjoy it and are challenged to live life differently as you keep trending up. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Trending Up. We're excited. As you can see already, we have a couple of my great friends here. We have Garrison Hayes.
Hello.
And Edgar de Leon again. Always with us, always a pleasure. So we're just going to get into it. Today we're talking about a little very, I think, interesting topic to all of us. You know, we've talked how Edgar and I are Latinos, Hispanic, we're Mexican. And Garrison.
South of the border, right?
South of the border. And Garrison shares some of that, I think, Mexican love too in his heart. But
I really do.
But before we jump into the topic that we have at hand, Garrison, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe our connection to you, if you want to just enlighten us in that. And
For sure. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me on your show, giving me a little time with you guys. I'm super excited to get into this conversation. So my name is Garrison Hayes. I am originally from Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia, born and bred, cornbread fed. That's my city. That's my home. Right now, I'm living in Alexandria, Virginia, where I pastor. I'm the associate pastor at the Community Praise Seventh-day Adventist Church. Alexandria is about 3.5 miles south of Washington, D.C. So right there, right there in the heart of it all. So I'm really excited to be in that place, and I'm loving my church, and I have great church members and a great senior pastor and a great staff. So that's great. Married to a beautiful woman. We just celebrated 4.5 months. We're coming up on 5 months this month. So we are newlyweds. But life is going great. Okay, so how did I meet you guys?
Yeah.
So we met at Southern in undergrad.
With who? Who are you talking to? Both of us?
Both of y'all. Yeah. You know, I think I knew you guys just from probably from sports or from the dorm or something.
Yeah,
right?
just crossing paths. Over years,
just exactly. But I know that we got close, Edgar. I think in your senior year, our last year at Southern together, we got really pretty close.
Yeah.
Sebi, we got close working in campus ministries together. And we ended up going to seminary together, Sebi and I, and being roommates. So sorry, Edgar, we got the one up.
You're the one up. At least I roomed with you. Edgar had promised to live with me, but
I couldn't lower my expectations.
You want to come to the old wing.
Sebi was in the slums, and I don't want to be there.
Yeah, that old wing was trash.
And another connection was, I guess you guys were both in my wedding, so
that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
That was a blessing in Texas, and we're about to be 2 years in.
Wow!
Oh my goodness!
Senior, such a senior! Wow!
In a couple of days. It's August 13th. What day today's the 5th? Yeah, August 13th. 2 years. Can you imagine that was 2 years that we were all in Texas in the heat?
Wow,
that's crazy.
Sweating out there.
The dry heat.
Yeah.
So that means that you got married on the same weekend as the Charlottesville protest from the white nationalists. Ooh.
Great way to remember it. There you go.
That's very we don't talk about things.
That was August 12th.
No, that's a good segue. So the reason Garrison is on here, and as you've already probably seen by the title, is that we wanted to bring Garrison's perspective into the topic of what it's like to be Black in America. As we'll kind of get into it later on, being a Latino, there's a lot of stereotypes that everyone has of everyone, right? Sometimes they get fulfilled and sometimes they come true, but we just wanted to bring Garrison in to kind of talk to us about his experience growing up. Yeah, Edgar.
Yeah, and I just want to mention that most people, some people say, well, I'm not biased, or I don't have any preconceived notions about the other person. I just treat people as people. And that reminds me of my history teacher who said, no matter who you are, you have biases. And
Right.
if you think you don't, you're not aware of them, but you do. And
Right.
I think that's something that we need to capitalize. So the perspective that Garrison has is unique to himself because no one else has the perspective of Garrison. Like that's just his perspective is
Right.
special. So
Right.
we need to hear from everybody because sometimes people say, well, no,
Yeah.
everybody has valuable perspectives. So thank you, Garrison,
Right.
for being on here and on this topic of like being Black in America.
Right.
Yeah, thank you guys.
So walk us through a little of what an experience. Obviously you don't speak for all Black people, but you can speak for Black people more than we can, of course.
Yeah.
So what is it? What's an experience being Black in America that others that aren't Black would not really know of? And I know that's a loaded question. There's a lot you can go into, but whatever you can enlighten us would be.
Yeah, it is kind of a loaded question. And, I mean, truthfully, right, like, as you say, I can't speak on behalf of all Black people, but I can speak on behalf of the general experience of Black people, the statistics that are out there that say that, hey, actually Black people experience these things more than other groups, right? They have these kinds of interactions and their communities are affected in these ways more than other people. I think ultimately the thing that kind of comes to mind as you ask this question is, there's a lot of information out there about experiences that Black Americans particularly and Black people generally have here in America. Like there's so many statistics and so much information from mass incarceration to disparate impact when it comes to laws in America, to the effects that segregation has had on our communities to this day through things like redlining and voter disenfranchisement and those kind of general things that are across the board. But the thing that really I think most people don't fully understand is that, James Baldwin has this quote, to be Black in America is to be in a constant state of rage, right?
Wow.
And I think that people don't understand that. I guess if I were to put it into like clear terms, it's really that most people really think that Black people are just dirty liars when it comes to their experiences in America, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And I really wish that non-Black people would understand that it's hard to talk about all the issues that our community is facing. It's hard to constantly be burdened with being the quote unquote expert opinion on racism in the room, right?
Yeah.
And when we do share, more often than not, American society is seeking to rebuff us. It's seeking to push back on what we're saying. We're like, hey, this is our experience in America. As a matter of fact, we have statistics to prove it.
Right.
Even when we do that, I find that there are so many people who simply do not believe us. And the issue that I'm finding with that is like, why? What about Black people do you believe to be so inherently morally inferior or inherently socially inferior that we would make things up about our experience,
Right.
So even if honestly, the information's out there on what's going on in our communities, right? Like that's readily and easily accessible. It's really a question of whether or not Americans, whether they be Latino, white, or even other Black people, Asian, whoever it is, it's really a question of whether or not we will believe the words of people in the community.
That's good. Yeah, because it's so true. I think you see that also in kind of in the rape culture conversation, Me Too movement, where it's like it's constantly being reframed. Well, if you wouldn't have dressed this way, or you wouldn't have gone to the bar so late, then maybe. And the same way, I think I really appreciate you, Garrison, just having that year that we spent together, which I think was great, was awesome, and just being at Andrews, moving away from the South and going more to to north of America. And being enlightened, because as Edgar and I have talked about, growing up in Cali or Texas, obviously we've been around diversity, we've been around different groups of people, but being a Latino, the way we're raised and what we're taught is it's different. We're kind of get into it in a little bit here, but I just really appreciate it because you sometimes the only perspective you have is what is shown by media, which That's a
Right.
whole other rabbit hole we can go down to.
Right.
And two, it's what's shown on social media, you know, what you've, and three, what other people have had personal experiences of. So most of the time we base all of our biases and understandings and even foundations of other people groups based off of non-first person encounters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not until, you know, that I
for sure.
lived with Garrison, I had black friends, not just your staple, oh, I'm not racist because I have a black friend, you know, but actual like listening, actually, you know, hey, I've been racially profiled. I got stopped yesterday for no reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm doing the same thing and I didn't get stopped. What is, you know, and so you begin to have these wrestling questions. And so I appreciate that, because I can't imagine how frustrating it has to be to always have to like justify, even though, like you're saying, the facts are there, the statistics are there, to have to constantly be on a defensive when people come like, well, it's not really like that. You know, it's to have to be constantly, I think, defending and, like you're saying, in a state of rage the whole time. So
Yeah, for sure. And now I'd like to chime in, and I know I didn't room with you guys, so I'm the odd man out. But no, I want to chime in and give a perspective from like scripture. It gives racial undertones are in scripture. The way that Moses' wife was treated as a Shumamite woman it's undertone that is there, because race problems is not new. It's a sin problem, and it's a people problem, and it's existed, and it will continue to exist as long as people are selfish and as long as people have their biases towards themselves, because typically most people don't ridicule those who they don't understand. So if you don't understand someone, if you don't have the perspective of the opposite view, you're not going to understand, and you're not going to make progress in understanding. So like, I grew up in Los Angeles, which is primarily in LA. I mean, most kids most kids were Latinos. I remember there was like 3 or 4 black boys and girls, and then I moved to Arizona, and I lived in the south side of Tucson, which is the poor side. And we had like a token 3 or 4 black kids, but everybody else was Mexican. So then I had that perspective. And as I moved to the south in Tennessee for 4 years, now I've been up here in the north for 4 years. I had like a molding of my brain to not just be biased to myself, but actually be open to that I could be wrong. And I think that's something is we're missing the humility in our society at times, when we're like, wait, could I be wrong? You know, wait, is my brother being treated, unfair? And typically everybody's looking out for the best interest rather than the other person. And I think that's what we're lacking. And for example, the shooting that happened, I know I don't want to go too much into it, because this is specifically for like I being black in America, but in El Paso is about the minorities, the Mexicans, the people the people that come from my heritage, and we see that attack because they don't like them. They don't like them. So to say there isn't a race problem is to be blind to the circumstances that we're in. So.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you talked about the Bible. There are so many instances throughout Scripture where, if we were to break down what is racism can be defined as prejudice plus power, right? When you activate your prejudice plus you have systemic power, you have now gone into the realm of racism. But with that basic breakdown, I mean, I really think, in America, we have a very narrow and incredibly we have a very basic understanding of racism. If you aren't saying the N word or calling someone, some really nasty name just because of their race, then you're not racist. But honestly, if we were to go deeper on what racism is, we will find that a lot of people hold racist views, right? So let's break down racism as prejudice plus power. If those two things come together, they create what's known as systemic racism, as racism at large, which is a system. So you break that down and you apply that to Scripture, you see many instances of prejudice and power coming together against other groups of people. and specifically, one instance that comes to my mind is in Acts chapter 6,
Mm-hmm.
where there are Greek or Hellenistic Jews that are living amongst all these other Hebrew Jews, right? And they're saying, wait a minute, these widows, they're like, wait a minute, our windows aren't being serviced. We aren't receiving the same opportunities, the same services that other people are receiving. What's going on here? So they go to the leadership and they're like, yo, y'all are being racist towards us. And we don't appreciate it.
Very true. Very true.
Now, what do the leaders in amongst these Christians, right? These are all Christians.
Right.
What do Christian leaders do? Christian leadership in the first, century church, they say, okay, we hear you. We hear what you're saying. We're going to acknowledge what you're saying. And to remedy this, we're going to choose leaders from your community.
Right, that's it.
And give them power and give them ways to actually remedy this thing, because they are boots on the ground. They know what's going on.
Exactly.
So they choose all these leaders with these Greek names. They choose Stephen and Nicanor and Parmenas, and like they choose these individuals with Greek Hellenistic names.
That's good.
Which tells us that they're from that community, and they give them the power to remedy the racism that has been happening in the community. Instead, now what do we see today in the 21st century church? We see Christian leaders being told that the policy and the things that you are getting behind is negatively affecting our community, it's hurting us.
Mercy.
And now Christian leaders today, they don't respond by saying, wait a minute, let's now give you power. Let's empower your community. Let's move resources and change our agenda in order to empower your community. Instead, what we're seeing is you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you don't love it, you need to leave it. All lives matter. Black lives don't. All lives matter. That's what we start seeing, right? We see a complete shift in the way that our church is dealing with issues of race comparatively when we look at the first century and now the 21st century church.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy. And when you think about it, like that's not how the first century church operated. Is exactly how God operates throughout his interaction with humans, right? It's never like, I'm just going to come impose who I am. No, I'm going to empower leaders to go back into their communities to grow it. I think of when Jesus goes and heals the demon-possessed man, right? And I think the Gadazarenes or whatever. And he's like, no, you can't follow you. Instead of following me and just leaving everything, go back and preach this gospel. So that's a beautiful application there with the widows there, and I appreciate that application to the Bible narrative. But yeah, like Edgar was saying, and as Garrison has been highlighting, this is not something that's new just in the 21st century. It's been coming. I mean, prime example, Israel and Egypt. The reason Moses had to go liberate his people because God had heard the cries of his people, right? And the fact that we serve a God that is so attuned to the cries of people that have been oppressed and treated badly and put down should be a warning to those who are in that, like you're saying, systemic power of putting others down, and just a rebuke is saying, hey, God is not on the side of those in control necessarily, but those that have been oppressed and put down and whatnot. And moving into, I don't know if you want to add something.
Before we transition, God's plan for humanity was a cohesion of people. The opposite is division and racism. So we see even in the Tower of Babel, people were separated because of their language, and then because of their language, they don't understand each other. So if you don't understand each other, why are you gonna be with each other? So you find that separation more and more, and then throughout Scripture, just develop and metastasizes in different ways. So as we move on forward, Sebastian, you can take us along.
Yeah. So Edgar, Garrison, you're in Baltimore, right?
Not quite. Well, kind of. I'm in the DMV. Definitely not far.
Closer than we are, for sure.
Certainly.
And recently, Baltimore's been kind of on the news, just as McAllen has been on the news, where my hometown, and Cali of some sorts, where Edgar's at. But Garrison, what are your thoughts now in terms of the political climate that is going on now? Especially now that you're working and ministering and in the DMV near Baltimore area. With what we're talking about, what are some things that come to mind or that are heavy on your heart that you wish people were more aware of? That a lot of times when we're listening to the news, we brush it off, but something we should be.
I have so many thoughts on that. Like I'm trying to choose the
Right,
best one to
right,
share. I mean, honestly, our president has, I mean, thinking of El Paso, Texas, which, I would say earlier, you're saying, I
right,
know we're focusing on Black issues, but I think it's
right.
all connected.
Yeah,
And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that,
yeah,
that
yeah,
Latino
for
Black
sure.
kind of intersection. But
Right.
that was a hate crime
Mm-hmm.
fueled by the rhetoric of the president of the United States of America.
Right.
Some people
Yeah.
have drawn a connection between
Yeah.
the exact language
Mm-hmm.
that the
Yeah.
president used, invasion,
Right.
and the
Yeah.
manifesto that this individual who killed all of these people,
Right.
uh, the language that he used in his writing on the topic.
Right.
So there's a one-to-one connection between the president's language
Hmm.
and a mass shooting that's based entirely on race.
Right.
I saw a post recently that was saying that this was the biggest, the largest mass shooting, race-based
Mm-hmm.
hate crime in 98 years. Okay, now this is
Wow.
significant. There's
98
also
years.
a 2,000 plus percentage increase
Right.
hate crimes in the counties where Trump has held rallies.
I
Okay.
saw that. That's amazing. That's
So so when we think about the fact that
right.
Trump's rhetoric, who he is, just who he is as a person, the
Mhm.
figure that he is in America,
Right.
has an immediate connection to the hardship
Wow.
of the lives of Black people and
Right.
brown people. Okay.
Right.
If you think
Right.
about, like, let's really think about the ramifications of this. It's not just like some, like, oh, he's just the president, I
Right.
stay
Right.
out of
Right. Right. Right.
politics. No, it has a very real effect. His words,
Right.
just his words alone, have a very real effect on the lives of Black and brown
Right.
people,
Right. Right.
to the place where there are Black and brown people who are dead today.
Wow.
Wow.
Because
Mercy.
And
of
it is a direct connection to the president's words. Okay,
right.
I say all that to say, when I think about what the president is saying about Baltimore, the dehumanization of the human beings that live in that city. No human would want to
Would ever-
live. Yeah, like those kinds of things that the president is saying. You can absolutely expect that lives will be lost in Baltimore
Mhm.
as a direct result of the president's words. Okay, you can actually expect that. And when we put it in those terms, at least for me, it gives me this sense that like this stuff matters more than just some
Right.
person that I don't like in the White House.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
This
Yeah.
Right.
person is emboldening the country to identify with a sense of racism that
Mhm.
we have been trying to move away from for the last 100 years.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
100 years of trying to move away from this, and here we are again. So without getting into the particulars of specific, like what's specifically going to happen in Baltimore, and how, the fact that Elijah
Right.
Cummings, his house was broken into,
Yeah.
and the president celebrates this. I mean, he doesn't celebrate it by saying, "Oh, I celebrate it." He says, "Oh, that's too bad." I mean, we
Right. Right.
hear his voice
There's no need to
saying,
tweet anything about that.
exactly. You're emboldening people to hurt and to take the lives of Black and brown people.
No, for sure. And I think something that we need to really capitalize is that words have the power to create and to empower. So to say that, oh, words don't really mean anything, we've all heard of the saying, what's it, break my bones with sticks and stones, but words won't hurt me. That is one of the biggest lies ever, because
Yep.
you can either encourage and build up a person or tear a person down with your words. So
Right.
as we see, especially because Twitter, I own like 4 stocks in Twitter, and so I appreciate Twitter. Okay, I own like it's like $50 or something. I appreciate Twitter, but Twitter has the ability to give a platform to really to people, and you have a certain amount of characters, and those characters are going to impact and
Absolutely.
resonate with certain people. So it's obvious to say it's not going to affect people. It's wrong. And I know that is something that it has to be understood, that the words being said by the person in our office will have ramifications that will either help or hurt. And we find that we find that, and especially as a minority in this country, and especially when you come out of like your area, your comfort zone of the South, and you come up to the North, it's a whole different world. And
Right.
the way that people even process life is just different, and it can be
Right.
hard.
Right.
My wife and I, it's still hard to today. We're like, man, Northerners are really like different. So, with that being said, the words that people say are going to affect
Yeah.
areas
Yeah.
and empower and say, this is right. Like,
Right.
people are in infestation, invasion. We gotta make an example, and it's it is
It's a lot. It's a lot.
it is tough.
Yeah. Proverbs 18:21. Sorry, Garrison.
No, go ahead.
It says the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. And I think it's so true. We're not even getting into like, I mean, we time evades us. Because we could talk about, like without even going into policies and laws like Garrison was talking about,
Exactly.
redlining, disenfranchisement, of not giving opportunities to rent out affordable and good housing in good communities, just mass incarceration. You could just talk about for hours and days of the systemic racism that is happening in this country. But we're not even talking about that at this point, right? We can recommend you to different places, documentary.
This is a conversation, right? This is
a conversation, but
it's
just
not an end all be all.
focusing on the importance as a leader. That's what gets me. We can agree, disagree. You can be Republican, Democrat, whatever. But as a leader, when you are representing an organization, an entity, as we are all pastors, we represent every person in our church. It's not like, oh, I just represent the people that sit on the left side because they're the one that actually say amen during church. No. And even though there's views that differ and whatnot, like you are a representative of every single person. And if I were to get up on Sabbath morning and say, man, I'll just only want to, I actually only appreciate my Mexican brothers in church. Honestly, I think there's only, I don't know how many, I don't think there's a lot of Mexicans in my church, actually. There's a lot of people in Portuguese, a lot of people from, the islands, Jamaica. So I would be like, why are you saying this? Like, you're a pastor to all of us. You're not a pastor to just
right.
Mexicans, for sure. And so I think it's so important to see that and say, man, he may not be committing the acts, but he surely is empowering this ideology that's always been under the fabric of the United States of America since its founding time. And empowering this and making it more okay, right? He's making it so that, maybe the views that I'm holding that my race is superior, or that these minorities should not be in this country, or that these persons should not be given basic human rights, then maybe that is true. Maybe that is the way the United States is. And if you don't like it, get out.
So to lead our conversation on, Garrison, how can we, so if we have like people saying this about like our Black communities or about minorities, how can we make a difference? Do we have a voice? Like, can we make a difference? Or do we just like sit back and be like, well, it is what it is? Or what do you think we can do?
I think there are three things that immediately came to my mind when you asked the question. The first is to participate in the census. I know that seems a little obtuse, a little random, but being counted is incredibly important. And in 2020, it's like kind of my hobby horse right now. Go be on the census, get on the census, so that our representatives will have no excuse to believe that their districts are whiter than they are, that their districts don't have Latino or diversity, like they don't have Black people, they don't have some diversity in their districts. And therefore, that's a call to your representative to represent your interests, right? Like to actually represent your community. That's incredibly important. This is for Black people, brown people, white people at large. Make sure that you are encouraging everyone to be on the census. That's something that we don't see our president doing. The second thing, get out and vote. Very important. I mean, our leaders mean something. Again, I'll repeat the statistics. This is 2,000 plus percentage increase in hate crimes in the counties where Donald Trump has had a rally. Wow. That means that voting, who we nominate, who we empower to be the voice and the spokesperson for our country matters. So go out and vote, not only in our national elections, but in your local elections, because those places end up being the training ground and the auditions for more and more responsibility. Like your city council members or your county executive is auditioning for a congressional seat or for a Senate seat, and maybe one day for a shot at the presidency. So be engaged in elections, vote. And then the third thing that immediately kind of came to mind was to educate yourself on racism
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And what does it look like? Racism is not just being a part of the KKK. Oh, I'm not in the KKK. Oh, I didn't say the N-word this week, so I'm not a racist. No. Racism is much deeper, right? There are so many more layers to it. Right. Educate yourself. And there's some resources that I could point people to specifically on the topic of racism. Yeah. But to give a kind of just a very brief idea, you know, there's a writer out there, Dr. Ibram Kendi. I love his work. He is specifically writing about not being a not racist person, but instead being what he calls an anti-racist person. Mm-hmm. Anti-racist is very different fundamentally than being not racist. A lot of people walk around saying like, yo, I'm not racist. Being not racist is not a thing, right? It is just not a helpful position. A helpful position when it comes to the topic of race is to be anti-racist. And what does that mean? Racism can be kind of bifurcated or split into two specific quadrants. Like one quadrant looks like segregationist racism. This is the racism that we kind of know inherently and understand almost inherently as Americans. These are the people who are saying the N-word and a part of the KKK and love David Duke and espouse white nationalist ideas. Right. Those people are the ones we look at and we're like, you're racist. Their basic fundamental belief is that these people of color, whether they are black or brown, are just inherently inferior to white people. That's just the basic idea of segregationist racism. Then there's this other more elusive form of racism known as assimilationist racism. Assimilationists believe that like, no, I wouldn't say that Garrison as a black man is just inherently inferior to white people or to a white man. But I'd say that his culture and his group, like they need to assimilate more into predominant white culture. This is what we see when people are pointing to Chicago as like this example of like black people need to, you know, get their communities together. That's assimilationist racism. When people say you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that's assimilationist racism. That's a form of racism that says like, I'm not going to say that you as a person are inferior, but your culture, your group, your society, the way that you guys do things are inferior. And the reason why that's racist is because it believes that somehow white culture or the predominant main culture is inherently superior to the people and the group of people and the culture of the people of color. That's what it basically believes. And that's racist. And what we see our president doing, and we see a lot of our national politics kind of moving towards is a conversation of like demonizing and diminishing black and brown communities, specifically because they believe that the ideal is white culture. And I'll give a very real example of that. As we saw in El Paso, right? Like the president can talk about Baltimore as these people who are essentially the scum of the earth. He can talk about other countries and Mexicans coming across the border as rapists and murderers.
Mercy.
But then when a white man intentionally listens to his rhetoric and then goes and kills 20 people, right? Because they are brown, that person is all of a sudden, they're just mentally ill. They're suffering from a mental
video game.
It's the mental illness, you know, like that's now the reason all of a sudden why he's doing what he's doing. What you're saying is that these other people, these other groups, they are inherently inferior. So their motivations are inherently inferior. But this white man, no. His culture, his group, they're superior. So this person must be an outlier, right?
Wow.
This must be something special that's wrong with this individual for the reason why they're doing this. And the reality is that it's not. If you were to look at history, you will find that white culture exists and thrives on the murder and the plundering of the bodies of black and brown people, period. Like they came to this country and wiped out a whole bunch of people, They enslaved a bunch of people. Right now, we are putting people in cages because they're brown. That's white culture. And we really need to deal with that and be honest about it, you know? So that's my long answer to
that's great. That's great. I appreciate that because it's so true. I just finished I recommended to you the podcast White Lies, talking about Reverend James Reed, that went down to help with the Selma March in I think it's Montgomery, Alabama, when Dr. King was there, and when they were voting they were marching and protesting for voter rights, and this white preacher from a Unitarian pastor from the North came down to show solidarity. He got killed, and to this day, they have not tried, or they had found, but they had found not guilty the individuals that were responsible for his killing. So the whole podcast talks about why was this just swept under the rug?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point is like, this is the South. This is what we do. And anything that has to, you're going against the grain of just the control that white people have and had at that time. And it's just amazing to see that. You just start thinking, and you're like, man, it has never stopped like that. You saw a big, maybe trending and hot topic for many people that may not see it as through black eyes, is police brutality. And they're like, oh no, blue lives matter. And yes, I believe there are good cops. I have friends that have parents that either are cops or their parents. And yes, I wouldn't want to be a cop just because of the stress level of the job and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to recognize that at least in the black community and brown communities, there have been too many instances where the law enforcement has never been 100% on the side of minorities and black and brown people, but rather it's been used as a force to keep these individuals, black and brown communities, in line and in place, which at the end of it is racism. It's systematic racism, and we just have to call it out as it is. This is our role, I think, as Christians in this. And Garrison, I appreciate you being vulnerable. I know it's always tough, and being a black man, I'm sure you're always called upon to be like, hey, well, what's your perspective as a black man, But I appreciate you because I think it really does enlighten us. Unless we're confronted with the truth, we'll never know what truth really is, right? Unless we're really shown what it is, and if we keep listening to narratives or people that are shaping it in different ways, then we won't ever understand what it's really like to be black in America. And even Latinos, as white passing Latinos, we don't know what it's like to be black in America. And so I think rather than trying to always be like, well, this isn't my situation, I've never felt this, I've never seen this realistically, I think all these blah blah blah, I think it's important to sit back, to have a posture of humility and recognize that, man, maybe I haven't seen all things. Maybe I've had the good side of the stick, and maybe I haven't seen the other side. And I think it's time and important for us to have these conversations. So I appreciate you, Garrison and Edgar, for communicating on this. And thanks for tuning in today. We're excited for our next conversation with Garrison Hayes, our part 2 of this 2-part series, where we will be talking about the relationship between the Latino community and the African American community. So we hope to see you next week. Peace. Thanks for joining us today. Make sure to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate us and share our content. Learn more about us by checking out our website. The link is in our show notes. From us to you, muchas gracias, and always keep trending up.